The crowd gathered around a wooden crate in the middle of a dusty Denver street. A tall man in a fine coat stood on top, waving bars of soap in the air. His voice carried over the noise like music. "Step right up, folks. Some of these bars have real cash hidden inside, maybe $1, maybe 100. Laughter, whispers, excitement. People pushed closer, eyes wide. That man was Jefferson Randolph Smith II, but the world would soon know him by a simpler name, Soapy Smith. He wasn't selling soap. He was selling hope, and that was the secret behind every great con he ever pulled. Soapy was born in Georgia in 1860, just before America tore itself apart in the Civil War. His family had once been rich, owning land, servants, and pride. But when the war ended, their wealth vanished. Little Jefferson grew up watching his parents struggle. The world had changed, and hard work didn't always pay. He learned early that charm could open doors faster than honesty. When he smiled, people trusted him. When he spoke, people listened. That gift, that magic, would become his greatest weapon. As a teenager, he left home searching for a better life. He wandered through the new American frontier, where fortunes were made overnight and lost just as fast. The West was wild, and so was he. In his early 20s, Jefferson discovered something that changed everything. People loved to believe they could win. He started small. Little tricks, card games, bets that always seemed fair, until you lost. He read faces like a book. He knew who was greedy, who was desperate, and who would fall for a good story. But he wasn't cruel. Not in his mind. He believed everyone deserved a show. And what was a good con, if not a kind of theater? Then, one hot afternoon in Denver, he found his masterpiece. Jefferson bought boxes of soap from a general store. He wrapped each bar in brown paper like a gift. Then he slipped money into a few of them. $1, $5, maybe even a crisp 100. He stood on a street corner and shouted like a preacher, "Ladies and gentlemen, some of these bars have cash inside. You could be the lucky one." People gathered. He made sure the first few winners were his friends, members of his secret gang. They shouted, they laughed, they showed their winnings to the crowd. The crowd went wild. Men and women threw money at him, each wanting their chance. By the end of the day, he had sold every bar. The crowd walked away smiling, even those who lost. That's when he realized it wasn't about the money inside the soap. It was about hope, excitement, and the dream of luck. And that was when Soapy Smith was born. The soap game made him famous in Denver. Soon Soapy gathered a group of loyal men, pickpockets, gamblers, and clever tricksters who shared his love for easy money. They called themselves the Soap Gang. Together, they ran games, card tables, and honest auctions where nothing was honest at all. Soapy opened his own saloon, the Tivoli Club, a place where laughter mixed with danger. He wasn't just a con man anymore. He was a boss, and strangely people liked him. He dressed well, tipped big, and always had a kind word. Some said he gave money to widows and helped poor strangers. Others said it was all part of his act. Whatever the truth, one thing was clear. Soapy Smith ruled Denver's underworld with charm instead of fear. Soapy believed there were two kinds of people in the world, the smart and the foolish. And in his mind, he wasn't robbing anyone. He was simply rewarding the clever and punishing the careless. He often said, if they're fool enough to fall for it, they deserve it. But not everyone agreed. Newspapers called him a menace. Preachers called him the devil in a silk hat. Still, the police turned a blind eye. Many were on his payroll. Politicians smiled when he entered the room. He had become untouchable. Yet deep down, Soapy knew every empire has an ending. The more power he gained, the more enemies he made. Honest shopkeepers hated him. Rival gamblers plotted against him, and Denver itself began to change. Law and order tightened. The Wild West was becoming civilized, and there was less room for men like Soapy Smith. He could feel it in the air. His city was slipping away. But Soapy never feared change. He saw it as an opportunity. There would always be another boomtown, another crowd hungry for fortune. When news spread of a new silver strike in Creede, Colorado, he packed his bags, gathered his gang, and headed for the next adventure. As the train carried him toward Creede, Soapy looked out the window and smiled. Behind him lay a city that had loved and feared him. Ahead, a new town full of dreamers and fools, miners and merchants, gamblers and gold hunters. He whispered to himself, where there's gold, there's greed. And where there's greed, there's a place for me. And with that, the legend of Soapy Smith, the man who sold soap for gold, rolled on toward destiny. The silver boom had turned the small mountain town of Creede, Colorado into a noisy, restless place. Tents and saloons covered the valley like weeds. Men carried picks, pistols, and dreams of getting rich overnight. Where there was gold or silver, there was greed, and that meant opportunity for Soapy Smith. He arrived with his gang one cold evening in 1892. The train whistle echoed through the canyon as Soapy stepped onto the platform, wearing a neat coat and a smile that could melt stone. Behind him followed his men, sharp-eyed, smooth-talking tricksters ready to make Creede their new stage. Soapy didn't waste time. He bought a building right on Main Street and turned it into a grand gambling hall called the Orleans Club. It had mirrors, whiskey, and velvet tables that made miners forget their worries. Every night, the lamps burned bright, cards flipped, and coins clattered across the floor. From the outside, it looked like fun and fortune. Inside, every deck was marked, every game was fixed, and every winner worked for Soapy. He ran Creede like a showman. He told jokes, bought rounds for the crowd, and called everyone friend. People adored him. Even the lawmen found it hard to say no to his charm. When trouble came, Soapy solved it with a smile or a bottle of whiskey. He had no need for violence. His weapon was confidence. Before long, the Orleans Club became the heart of Creede. Miners who struck it rich came there to celebrate, and those who lost their wages came hoping to win them back. Either way, Soapy Smith always walked away richer. He also set up little side hustles, rigged auctions, fake lotteries, even charity drives, where every coin ended up in his pocket. But he made sure to give just enough back, a small donation here, a kind gesture there, so people called him generous instead of greedy. That was Soapy's genius. He never wanted to be feared. He wanted to be liked, and he was. Men trusted him. Women called him a gentleman. In a town full of rough miners and broken souls, Soapy Smith seemed like the only man who truly knew what he was doing. Then came the newspapers. Reporters from Denver started writing stories about the silver boom and the colorful characters in Creede. They wrote about the gamblers, the drifters, and the mysterious man they called the King of Creede. Soapy loved it. He hung the headlines on his saloon wall. Every word of praise was free advertisement. His name spread across Colorado like wildfire, but fame is a dangerous friend. The brighter you shine, the easier you are to see and to hate. Not everyone in Creede worshipped Soapy Smith. Some miners accused him of cheating them. A few business owners said he bribed the sheriff. One even claimed that Soapy ran a secret court where disputes were settled in his favor, for a fee. Rumors grew like smoke from a campfire. Still, Soapy stayed calm. He had faced worse. He threw parties, sang songs, and told anyone who would listen that he was just a businessman giving people what they wanted. He knew the truth didn't matter as much as the story people believed. Then fate turned on Creede. In the spring of 1892, a massive fire swept through the town. It started in a saloon and spread fast through the wooden buildings. Flames ate everything, homes, shops, dreams. The Orleans Club burned to the ground. Soapy watched as his empire turned to ash. For a man who built his life on illusions, seeing real fire destroy his world was a shock. But Soapy Smith wasn't one to mourn for long. He saw the smoke, wiped the soot from his coat, and said quietly, "Time to find a new show." By then, Creede's silver rush had begun to fade. Miners left as fast as they had come. The money dried up, the laughter vanished, and the town that had once loved Soapy became just another ghost on the map. Soapy packed what was left of his fortune and called his men together. They boarded another train, this time heading north. He'd heard whispers of a new kind of rush, gold, not silver, in a faraway land called Alaska. Tens of thousands were sailing there, hungry for wealth, and Soapy Smith knew where there was gold, there was greed. As the train rolled away from Creede, he looked out at the dark mountains fading behind him. He felt no sadness, only curiosity. Every town was the same, every crowd full of dreamers waiting to be convinced. He smiled, thinking of the future. New faces, new tricks, new stories. In Denver, he had learned the art of the con. In Creede, he had learned the art of power. Now he was ready for something bigger, a final stage worthy of the King Khan of the West. That stage waited in the frozen frontier of Skagway, Alaska, a place of chaos, gold, and desperation where Soapy Smith would build his last empire and meet his end. The world was changing fast, and so was Soapy Smith. By 1897, Denver was too small, Creed was a memory, and the true fortune hunters were heading north, chasing a new dream, the Klondike Gold Rush. They came from everywhere, men with shovels, gamblers, drifters, and dreamers. Newspapers said there was gold for the taking in the frozen lands of Alaska and the Yukon. That was all Soapy needed to hear. To him, gold wasn't found in the ground. It was found in people's hearts, in their greed, in their hopes, in their blind faith. So he packed his bags, gathered a few loyal men from his old gang, and set sail for the last great frontier. The journey was long and rough. Cold winds cut through the ship, and the sea roared like it wanted to swallow them whole. But Soapy stood on the deck smiling, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He wasn't afraid of the wild. The wild had always been his home. When the ship finally reached Skagway, Alaska, it was chaos. The docks were crowded with thousands of gold seekers shouting, fighting, and dreaming. The streets were mud and madness. Tents, shacks, and saloons sprang up overnight. Money moved faster than the river. To most, Skagway looked like a mess. To Soapy Smith, it looked like opportunity. He set up shop almost immediately. He opened a saloon he proudly named Jeff Smith's Parlor, a place that looked respectable from the outside but was pure deception inside. The walls were lined with mirrors and fine furniture, and Soapy greeted everyone like an old friend. Before long, Jeff Smith's Parlor became the social center of Skagway. Men came to drink, gamble, and talk business. Soapy came to take their money, but Soapy wasn't just a thief, he was a builder. He created an entire web of scams. There was the fake telegraph office, one of his cleverest tricks. Newcomers could send messages home, paying high fees for the service. What they didn't know was that the wires ended at the wall. The telegrams never went anywhere. He also ran shell games, card tables, and fake lotteries. His men, the new version of his old soap gang, worked the crowds day and night. They'd befriend miners, help them invest their gold, and disappear by morning. But Soapy was smart enough to keep his image clean. He gave speeches, joined charities, and claimed to protect Skagway from real criminals. He even led a local militia, calling himself Colonel Smith. To some, he was a hero who brought order. To others, he was the very disease killing the town from within. Still, people admired him. He had style. He wore nice suits, carried himself like a gentleman, and always smiled, even when lying through his teeth. The more Soapy gained, the bolder he became. He owned the police, influenced the mayor, and scared off anyone who challenged him. For a while, he truly ruled Skagway, not by law but by charm. But the cracks began to show. A group of honest townspeople had had enough. They called themselves the Committee of 101, a vigilante group determined to clean up Skagway. At first, Soapy laughed. He'd faced angry mobs before. He thought they'd fold like all the others, but this time it was different. These people weren't afraid of him. They were organized, armed, and furious. Rumors spread that they planned to destroy everything Soapy had built. For the first time in years, Soapy began to feel something he hadn't felt since his youth: pressure. The committee started investigating his businesses. They questioned his men. They warned travelers to stay away from his games. Every day, his grip on the town loosened. But Soapy wasn't the type to back down. He started carrying a Winchester rifle and gathering loyal followers, turning his gang into a kind of private army. He told them, if they want a war, we'll give them one. Behind the charm, the mask was cracking. He drank more, smiled less, and trusted no one. The man who once ruled through laughter now ruled through fear. One night, while sitting alone in Jeff Smith's parlor, he stared at his reflection in the mirror. The same mirror he used to impress his guests. He looked older, harder, colder. Maybe, he thought, the game was finally catching up to him. Outside, Skagway roared on, the noise of drunks, gamblers, and desperate men chasing gold that might not even exist. Inside, Soapy Smith was planning his next move. He wasn't done yet. He refused to fade away like Creed. He would show them all that the King Khan still ruled, but deep down, he knew this frontier was different. This wasn't Denver or Creed. This was Alaska, wild, untamed, and merciless. Here, the cold didn't forgive. Neither did the people. And so, as the summer of 1898 began, the stage was set for Soapy's final act, a showdown that would decide whether the King Khan would walk away, smiling once more, or fall for the last time in the land of gold and ice. Skagway was unlike any place Soapy Smith had ever seen. It wasn't a town, it was a storm. Thousands of men poured in every week, chasing gold and luck. The streets were packed with shouting, deals, and danger. Some came rich, most left poor. Everyone wanted something, and Soapy Smith knew how to give people exactly what they wanted, for a price. When he first opened Jeff Smith's parlor, it didn't look like a den of thieves. It looked respectable. Clean wood floors, bright lights, framed pictures on the wall. There was even a piano in the corner. The sign above the door read simply, Jeff Smith's Parlor. Inside, though, it was more than a bar. It was Soapy's kingdom. He stood behind the counter most nights, dressed sharp, greeting every customer by name if he could remember it, and if he couldn't, he'd make one up and say it like he meant it. That was his gift. He made strangers feel like old friends. Men came in to drink, laugh, and gamble. But without realizing it, they also stepped into Soapy's web. Every deal, every smile, every toast was part of a plan. His gang worked the crowd like actors in a play. They'd win small to build trust, lose a little to keep it fair, and then take everything when it mattered most. But Soapy's genius wasn't only in cards or dice. He understood people, their fears, their dreams, their pride. He knew that gold fever made honest men foolish. He once said to a new recruit, "Don't steal their money, let them give it to you." That was the heart of Soapy's power. Not far from the parlor stood his most clever trick, the telegraph office. On the outside it looked official, with signs and wires stretching along the wall. Newcomers paid to send messages home, often asking families to wire money back to Alaska. The clerk smiled, took their payment, and pretended to send the message. But the wires? They didn't lead anywhere. They ended right behind the wall, hidden by a wooden board. It was the perfect con, and Soapy made a fortune from it. Still, he didn't just see himself as a crook. He believed he was bringing order to Skagway. He paid off police, gave speeches about justice, and even formed his own militia, the Skagway Military Company. He loved the title Colonel Smith. It made him sound like a man of honor. When reporters came through town, he made sure to pose for photographs, gun in hand, chin raised, smiling like a hero. The truth was, Soapy ruled Skagway through charm and fear alike. His men controlled gambling, fake auctions, and every crooked deal in town. If someone refused to play by his rules, they'd be robbed, beaten, or run out. Yet even then, people couldn't help but admire him. He gave money to churches, helped the poor when it suited him, and kept violent drunks off the streets, unless they were his own. Soapy loved being the center of everything. He'd walk through town tipping his hat, handing out cigars, making jokes that made even his enemies laugh. He seemed untouchable, but deep down, trouble was brewing. As Skagway grew, honest merchants and miners started to get tired of the scams. They whispered about forming a group to stand against Soapy's control. The newspapers called it a town divided, half under the King Khan, half against him. Still, Soapy didn't worry. He'd faced angry crowds before. They'd never beaten him. He believed charm could fix anything. One evening, he hosted a grand poker game in the back of the parlor. The room was full of gold dust, whiskey, and lies. Soapy watched with quiet pride. The cards danced, the money flowed, and everyone was smiling, just the way he liked it. Then a stranger walked in, a young miner from Seattle. He'd just arrived in town, pockets heavy with gold. Soapy welcomed him warmly, offered him a drink, and invited him to play. The miner hesitated, but the crowd urged him on. Within an hour, he'd lost everything. When he realized he'd been cheated, he stormed out, shouting that he'd get his money back. That small spark lit a fire. Word spread fast. Another honest man robbed by Soapy Smith's gang. By morning, the Committee of 101 was no longer a rumor. It was real. A group of townsmen, shopkeepers, traders, and miners had joined forces to take Skagway back. They swore to drive Soapy and his men out of town, one way or another. Soapy laughed when he heard it. 101? He said with a grin. That's fine. I'll bring 102. But even as he joked, he knew the balance had shifted. The town was turning against him. The police were no longer loyal. His men were nervous, and for the first time in a long while, Soapy felt the cold wind of change. He poured himself a drink that night and sat alone in the parlor. The piano was quiet. The laughter was gone. All he could hear was the soft crackle of the oil lamp and the faint sound of rain outside. He stared at his reflection in a glass and muttered, "Every show ends sometime, but even then." He refused to give up the stage. He had one more act to perform, one last gamble to prove that King Khan still ruled the West, and that act would lead him straight to the night that ended it all. The summer of 1898 arrived in Skagway with long days and restless nights. The town buzzed with gold fever, but under the noise something darker was growing. People had begun to whisper the same name over and over, Soapy Smith. For months he had ruled the town like a clever king. He owned the saloons, the games, and half the law. No one made money in Skagway without his blessing. But every empire breeds resentment, and every con has an ending. The merchants and miners had grown tired of being cheated. Travelers complained of being robbed before they even reached the goldfields. Mothers warned their sons to stay out of Soapy's saloon. Then one night, after another man lost his savings in a rigged card game, a group of townsmen gathered in secret. They met in a back room lit by a single lantern. Voices were low but angry. They swore that if the law would not stop Soapy Smith, they would. They called themselves the Committee of 101. It began as a quiet movement. Store owners, honest gamblers, and miners who had seen enough lies. But soon it grew. They posted warnings in shop windows, urging citizens to resist Soapy's influence. They met weekly, collecting names of his men, gathering evidence, and waiting for the right moment. When Soapy heard about it, he laughed. 101 honest men, he said. Then I'll have 102 dishonest ones. But his smile hid a trace of worry. Skagway was changing, and this time the people weren't afraid of him. The committee started spreading word among the new arrivals. They told travelers to avoid Soapy's games, to keep their gold safe, and to stay alert. They warned the telegraph office was fake and the gambling dens were rigged. For the first time, Soapy's tricks were losing power. His gang noticed it too. Business slowed, and loyal men began disappearing one by one. Some ran off to Dawson City. Others simply vanished into the mountains. Still, Soapy refused to give up. He doubled his efforts, telling everyone that the committee was nothing but jealous merchants who hated success. He gave speeches in the streets, smiling wide and waving his hat. "Skagway needs a leader," he said, "and I've been that leader since day one." But the crowd's cheers were quieter now. Their eyes no longer sparkled with trust. The tension reached its breaking point after a young miner was robbed of all his gold right after arriving in town. He went to the committee for help, claiming Soapy's men had tricked him. That was the final spark. The committee declared war. They decided to take back Skagway once and for all. Meetings turned into patrols. Men armed themselves and stood guard around town. They planned to confront Soapy and his gang face to face. The newspapers began calling it a fight for the soul of Skagway. Soapy, sensing danger, prepared for battle in his own way. He gathered his remaining men inside Jeff Smith's parlor and gave a speech. His voice was calm but firm. "They think they can take my town from me," he said, pacing the floor. "This town was nothing before I came here. I built it. I gave them order, business, life. And now they turn on me?" He slammed his hand on the bar. The glasses rattled. "Let them come. I'll face them myself." That night he cleaned his Winchester rifle and laid it beside his chair. The smile was gone. The charm that once made him untouchable now looked like a mask cracking under pressure. Outside, the committee prepared their own plan. They would meet at the docks to discuss peace terms, but most knew it wouldn't end peacefully. Too much anger had built up. Too much pride stood in the way. As dawn approached, Soapy walked through the empty streets, the rifle across his shoulder. The town he once ruled now felt like a stranger. Windows were dark, doors were shut. Even the wind seemed to whisper against him. In the distance, he could see the faint glow of lamps near the waterfront. That was where the committee gathered. He stopped for a moment. Looking back toward Jeff Smith's parlor, the symbol of everything he had built and everything he was about to lose. For the first time in years, Soapy Smith stood alone. No gang, no crowd, no applause. Just a man and his choices. He adjusted his hat, straightened his coat, and muttered under his breath, "Every king meets his reckoning." Then he walked toward the docks. The night was quiet except for the sound of boots on wet planks and the creak of the tide below. The committee's guards saw him coming and shouted warnings. Soapy didn't stop. In that moment, the King Khan of the West wasn't a legend or a liar. He was just a man walking into the final chapter of his story. The confrontation that awaited him on the Juneau Wharf would decide everything: his pride, his empire, and his life. The air in Skagway was heavy that evening, thick with tension and rain. Word had spread across the town like wildfire. Soapy Smith was on his way to confront the Committee of 101. People whispered from behind doors, peeking through windows, afraid to step outside. Down by the harbor, the Juneau Wharf stretched out into the cold, dark water. Wooden planks creaked under the feet of the committee members who stood guard. They were tired, angry men, holding rifles and lanterns that flickered in the mist. At the far end of the dock stood Frank H. Reed, a former soldier turned surveyor, brave, stubborn, and ready to face Soapy Smith himself. Soapy had been pacing in Jeff Smith's parlor for hours, his Winchester rifle resting against the table. His men begged him to stay inside, to wait and let things cool down. But Soapy wasn't the waiting type. He'd built his life on confidence, and he wasn't about to hide behind a door now. He downed the last of his whiskey, pulled on his hat, and said quietly, "If they want me, they'll have to face me." He slung the rifle over his shoulder and stepped out into the cold night. The streets were empty. Only the sound of rain tapping against rooftops followed him as he walked toward the wharf. The glow from lanterns ahead shimmered on the wet boards. His boots echoed with slow, steady steps, the march of a man who knew this might be the end. When Soapy reached the entrance to the dock, the guards saw him and shouted, "Stop right there, Soapy!" "The committee doesn't want trouble." He smiled, that same famous smile that had fooled hundreds before. "No trouble, boy," he said calmly. "I just want to talk." The men hesitated but didn't lower their guns. Behind them, Frank Reed stepped forward, holding his revolver tight. His face was tense, his jaw set. "Soapy," Reed called out, "you've caused enough harm in this town. It's over. Turn around and go home." Soapy took another step closer. "Go home? This is my home. I built this town while you hid in the shadows." Reed raised his gun. "You've built nothing but lies." The two men stared at each other, rain dripping from their hats. The crowd of onlookers, dock workers, gamblers, shopkeepers, held their breath. Everyone knew what was coming. Suddenly, Soapy lifted his rifle, and in a flash, a gunshot ripped through the night. The echo rolled across the harbor like thunder. Reed fired back almost instantly. The flash from his pistol lit up both their faces. Two proud men caught in a deadly moment, neither could escape. For a few seconds, the world went silent again. Then another shot rang out. Then another. When the smoke cleared, Soapy staggered backward. A bullet had hit him straight in the heart. His rifle slipped from his hands, clattering onto the wooden boards. He fell to his knees, gasping for air. Reed stood motionless, his gun trembling in his hand. Blood ran down his side. He'd been hit too. Soapy looked up one last time, his famous grin flickering like a dying flame. He whispered something no one could quite hear. Maybe a curse, maybe a laugh, and then he fell face first onto the dock. The King Khan was dead. Rain poured harder, washing blood into the sea. Reed was carried away, barely conscious. He'd survive the night but die of his wounds days later. Both men became part of Skagway's legend. One a hero, one a villain, though even that depended on who told the story. By morning, the town buzzed with shock. Crowds gathered to see the place where Soapy Smith had fallen. Some cursed his name. Others spoke softly, saying he got what he deserved. But there were a few, especially the gamblers and drifters, who raised a glass in his memory. Because in their eyes, Soapy wasn't just a criminal. He was a symbol of the wild frontier, brave, bold, clever, and doomed. His body was buried in a small graveyard at the edge of town, not far from the place where he died. The marker was plain: Jefferson R. Smith, died July 8, 1898. And though his empire of lies was gone, his legend only grew. Stories spread from Alaska to Colorado, each one painting him in a different light: outlaw, hero, trickster, showman. Years later, old-timers in Skagway would still gather in saloons and tell tales about the night the King Khan fell. They'd describe the gunfire, the shouting, the rain, and how even in death Soapy had that half-smile, as if he knew he'd become a legend. the Committee of 101 disbanded soon after. Their mission was over, but the town never forgot. Every year, on the anniversary of his death, locals still hold a gathering they call the Soapy Smith Wake. They drink, tell stories, and remember the man who conned an entire frontier and paid the price. For Soapy Smith, the game was always about more than money. It was about the thrill, the show, the belief that a sharp mind could outwit fate itself. But on that rainy night on Juneau Wharf, fate finally won. The morning after the gunfire, Skagway was quiet, too quiet. The town that had once echoed with laughter, deals, and drunken songs now whispered with fear and curiosity. The body of Soapy Smith, the man who had ruled them for nearly a year, lay cold in the small morgue near the docks. Rain still fell, soft and steady, washing the blood from the boards of Juneau Wharf into the dark sea below. The place where he had fallen was now a shrine of sorts, not official, but powerful. Men stood there with hats in their hands. Some came to curse him, others to pay their respects. The Committee of 101 moved quickly. They arrested several members of Soapy's gang and shut down Jeff Smith's parlor. They tore down the fake telegraph wires, closed the gambling dens, and declared that Skagway was finally free from corruption. But freedom came at a cost. Without Soapy's control, chaos took over. For all his crimes, Soapy had brought a strange kind of order. He kept the worst criminals in line and kept business moving. With him gone, everyone wanted to fill the empty throne. Small-time thieves, rival gamblers, and drunken cowboys all fought to claim what was left of his empire. Within a week, Skagway was full of confusion again. The same townsmen who had cheered Soapy's death now argued among themselves. Who would lead? Who would keep peace? The same old question haunted them all. And in the middle of it, Soapy Smith's name refused to die. The newspapers wrote about the shootout, each with a different story. Some called him a notorious outlaw. Others called him a misunderstood genius. One paper in Denver even wrote, "Soapy Smith, a man too clever for his own time." Back in the South, his family was stunned by the news. His father, old and frail, read the report in silence. His brothers and sisters argued over what he had become, a disgrace or a legend. One relative said softly, "He could have been anything, but he chose the game." Meanwhile, in Skagway, life moved on. The boomtown spirit faded as fast as it had come. When the gold rush slowed, so did the crowds. The saloons emptied and the once busy docks grew quiet. The place where Soapy Smith had ruled turned into another forgotten corner of the frontier. Yet, even as time passed, his story refused to fade. Travelers who came to Skagway would hear his name whispered in bars. Old men would lean close and say, "You ever hear about Soapy Smith, the man who sold soap for gold?" Then they'd laugh and tell the tale, half truth, half myth, about the charming con artist who ran a town and died with a smile. In a strange way, death gave Soapy what he'd always wanted, immortality. His Jeff Smith's parlor was left standing for years, empty and dusty, its sign still swinging in the wind. Some said it was haunted, that on quiet nights you could hear laughter, clinking glasses, and the faint echo of Soapy's voice calling, "Step right up, folks. Luck favors the bold." The Committee of 101 soon faded too. They had won the fight, but their victory was hollow. Many members moved away. Others returned to their shops and mines, pretending they'd never been part of the bloodshed. Skagway went back to being just another gold rush town trying to survive. But stories travel faster than truth. In Denver, gamblers told tales of how Soapy had once fooled an entire crowd into cheering while he stole from them. In Creed, old miners remembered the days when he ruled like a king, buying drinks for everyone while taking their wages at the card table. Each story changed a little. Some said he was shot in the back. Others claimed he fired first and died laughing. But every version ended the same way. Soapy Smith, the King Con, fell, not because he ran out of tricks, but because he finally met someone who wouldn't play his game. Years later, when Skagway began honoring its history for tourists, they restored Jeff Smith's parlor and turned it into a small museum. Inside were his old photos, his revolver, and letters from people who knew him. Some visitors looked at those relics with disgust. Others stared in wonder, trying to imagine the man behind the myth, because Soapy wasn't just another outlaw. He was something rarer, a reflection of the age itself. The frontier was full of dreamers, hustlers, and heroes, and Soapy managed to be all three at once. He had come from a broken South, built himself up with words and wit, and played the greatest game of all, convincing people that fortune was just one lucky moment away. In the end, that dream killed him. But it also made him unforgettable. Even now, more than a century later, the name Soapy Smith still lingers in books, museums, and stories told around campfires. He's remembered not just as a criminal, but as a symbol of the wild, reckless spirit of the American frontier. He didn't find gold in the ground. He found it in people, in their hope, their greed, and their endless hunger for luck. And maybe in his own twisted way, that was the biggest con of all. Years passed after the gunfire on Juneau Wharf. The gold rush that had filled Skagway with noise and greed faded into memory. The saloons grew quiet, the mines emptied, and the people who had once cheered or cursed Soapy Smith moved on. But his name never left. Like smoke rising from an old fire, the legend of Soapy Smith drifted across the West, from Alaska to Colorado, from mining camps to city saloons. Wherever men gathered to gamble, drink, or tell stories, someone would eventually say his name. Soapy Smith, they'd whisper, the man who sold soap for gold. And then the stories would begin. Some said he could talk a man out of his last dollar with a smile. Others swore he once convinced a crowd that a bar of soap held a fortune inside. A few claimed he wasn't evil, just clever. He never robbed anyone, one old-timer would say. He just let people rob themselves. Every storyteller made Soapy larger than life. Each tale added something new, a wild trick, a narrow escape, a clever quote. The truth melted into legend until no one could tell one from the other. Back in Skagway, the town he once ruled tried to forget him, but it couldn't. Tourists came asking where he died, where he drank, where he lived. The locals pointed to the weathered remains of Jeff Smith's parlor, still standing against the wind, its sign faded but proud. Inside, the dust seemed alive with memory. The creaking floorboards echoed with footsteps long gone. Some nights, people swore they could still hear Soapy's laughter drifting through the empty rooms, smooth, confident, and just a little dangerous. It didn't take long for the town to realize something important. Soapy Smith had become their story. Every town needs a legend, and Skagway's belonged to him. They began holding an annual event called the Soapy Smith Wake, a strange celebration of the man they once feared. Locals and travelers gathered in bars, raising glasses of whiskey to the King Khan of the West. They laughed, told stories, sang songs, and reenacted his final gunfight. At first, some thought it was wrong to honor a criminal. But over time, it became a tradition. Because the truth was, Soapy Smith wasn't remembered just for his crimes. He was remembered for his charm, his courage, and the wild energy that defined an entire era. He symbolized the untamed spirit of the frontier. Clever, daring, flawed, and free. Writers and historians began to rediscover him. Books were written, including King Khan, The Story of Soapy Smith by Jane G. Hay, which retold his life with all its tricks and tragedies. Each author tried to answer the same question: who was the real Soapy Smith? Was he a villain? A thief who preyed on the weak? Or was he a genius? A man who understood human nature better than anyone else? No one could agree. And that mystery kept his legend alive. Even his nickname carried magic. Soapy. It sounded innocent, almost funny, like a joke you could trust. But behind that soft word was a mind as sharp as a blade. He could sell anything, to anyone, at any time, and they'd walk away thanking him for it. In the early 1900s, as America began to modernize, the Wild West became a story, and Soapy Smith became one of its characters. Not just a man, but a symbol of the dangerous, glittering age that came before order took over. In Denver, old saloons still told stories of the Soap Gang, how they ruled the streets and tricked even the smartest men. In Creede, miners remembered him as the gambler who brought life to the boomtown. And in Skagway, he was still both ghost and king, the man who made a fortune out of nothing but charm. Visitors who stood by his grave at the edge of town often felt something they couldn't explain, a mix of admiration and unease. The simple stone marker read his name, his birth, and death, but not what he had truly been. Because how could you sum up a life like Soapy Smith's with a few words on stone? He had been a dreamer, a trickster, a businessman, a liar, and a leader. He had turned scams into theater, crime into art, and deceit into survival. And though his empire was gone, the spirit of his story refused to die. Today, historians call him one of the most fascinating figures of the American frontier, not because he was the richest or the most dangerous, but because he understood something few ever did, that people will always pay for the promise of hope. Whether it's gold hidden in soap or a card that might win the jackpot, the dream of luck never fades. Soapy Smith knew that dream better than anyone. He lived by it. He died for it. And in doing so, he became the legend he always wanted to be. The man who could outsmart the world, at least for a little while, in the end. Maybe that was Soapy's greatest con of all. Not the soap, not the telegraph, not the cards, but this, convincing history to remember him not just as a thief, but as a story worth telling forever. Behind every legend lies a man, flesh, bone, and heartbeat. Beneath the stories, the smiles, and the scams, Jefferson Randolph Smith II was still that boy from Georgia who had grown up hungry in a world that gave him little and expected even less. The myth of Soapy Smith had grown so large that most people forgot there was ever a real person under the hat and grin. But to understand his story fully, you have to peel back the layers, the laughter, the lies, the legend, and look at the man who created it all. He was born in 1860, the year before America tore itself apart in civil war. His family, once proud and wealthy, lost almost everything when the fighting ended. The Smiths were left with debts, broken land, and the memory of better days. Jefferson learned early that money meant freedom, and that without it, a man was invisible. He promised himself he would never be invisible again. He wasn't born cruel. Those who knew him young said he was charming, polite, and quick to help a stranger. But charm became his armor, and words became his weapon. When he realized how easily people believed what they wanted to believe, something inside him changed. He discovered that truth was flexible, and that the world rewarded confidence more than honesty. That discovery became his religion. When he stood on the street in Denver shouting about bars of soap with hidden money, he wasn't just scamming a crowd, he was performing. Each shout, each gesture, each sly wink was part of a show. The coins tossed his way were applause. Even in the middle of his crimes, Soapy believed he gave people something real. A dream, a moment of excitement, a story to tell. He once told a friend, "I never robbed anyone who didn't want to be robbed." It sounds cold, but in his mind it was true. He saw life as a game. Some won, most lost, and he was simply better at playing it. Still, there were glimpses of the man behind the mask. In Denver, he gave money to widows and war veterans. In Creed, he helped rebuild part of the town after the Great Fire. In Skagway, he once rescued a lost child and paid for her family's passage back to Seattle. No one could decide if those acts came from guilt or generosity. Maybe both. Because deep down, Soapy Smith wanted more than money. He wanted respect. He wanted to be seen as important, as someone who mattered. That's why he dressed like a gentleman, carried himself with authority, and demanded to be called Colonel Smith. He could have been a politician, a businessman, even a preacher. But the line between honest work and easy money was too thin, too tempting. He was addicted, not to whiskey or gambling, but to control, to the rush of fooling the world and getting away with it. But every addiction ends the same way, with loss. In the end, the lies he told others became the lies he told himself. He believed he was untouchable. He believed his charm could save him from any consequence. And on that rainy night at Juneau Wharf, that belief met reality and lost. After his death, those who had known him spoke in mixed tones. Some said he was the devil himself. Others said he was the best friend they ever had. One man from his old gang told a reporter, "Soapy wasn't bad, he just didn't know how to stop. He kept playing even after the game was over." That might be the truest thing anyone ever said about him, because Soapy Smith lived in a world built on illusion. He made people believe in luck, in quick fortune, in magic hidden under the surface of everyday life. But once the illusions were gone, once the smoke cleared, he was just a man, tired and alone, facing the weight of his own creation. He wasn't born to be a villain. He became one because it was the only way he knew how to win, and maybe, somewhere deep down, he knew how it would end. Maybe that's why he smiled even as he fell, because he had always known the house doesn't lose forever. History has turned him into a symbol, a character larger than life. But if you look closely, the truth is simpler and sadder. Soapy Smith wasn't a hero, and he wasn't a monster. He was a mirror. He reflected the hunger, greed, and hope of the Wild West, the dream that anyone could rise, no matter how they did it. He was the last performer of a dying age, standing on a wooden crate, selling soap to a crowd that wanted to believe. And maybe that's why his story still matters today. Because every time someone promises something too good to be true, every time greed blinds judgment, every time charm hides deceit, Soapy Smith lives again. The man behind the myth never truly disappears. He just changes shape, wears a new name, and starts the show all over again. More than a century has passed since Soapy Smith fell on the wooden planks of Juneau Wharf. The world he once ruled, of dusty streets, smoky saloons, and gold dreams, has long vanished. Yet somehow his name still lingers, like a ghost that refuses to fade. Every year, in the small town of Skagway, Alaska, people gather to remember him. They call it the Soapy Smith Wake. It's not a sad event, it's a celebration. Locals and visitors dress in old Western clothes, raise glasses of whiskey, and retell the story of the man who sold soap for gold. Laughter fills the air. Music plays, and for one night the King Khan returns to life. No one there truly praises his crimes, but they can't deny the thrill of his legend. Soapy has become a symbol, not of evil, but of boldness, wit, and the strange magic of human ambition. Tourists visit Jeff Smith's parlor, now a tiny museum with creaking floors and fading pictures on the walls. Behind glass displays lie his revolver, his hat, and letters written in his sharp, elegant handwriting. Visitors stare in silence, trying to imagine the man who once stood there, smiling, scheming, charming an entire town. For some, he's a warning. For others, he's inspiration. But for everyone, he's unforgettable. The truth is, Soapy Smith's legacy isn't about crime or greed. It's about understanding the human heart. He knew what people wanted most wasn't gold or power. It was the dream of something more. A lucky break, a miracle, a promise that tomorrow could change everything. That's why his story still feels alive today. Modern times have their own Soapies, not in dusty saloons, but behind screens on stages and headlines. The same charm, the same confidence, the same ability to sell dreams. Different tools, same trick. And if Soapy were alive now, he would have fit right in. He'd smile into a camera, tell a story, and make people believe. Because his real skill wasn't stealing, it was persuading. He understood the golden rule of human nature. People don't buy what's real. They buy what they want to be real. In that way, Soapy Smith was ahead of his time. Historians debate his place in the story of the American West. Some call him a criminal mastermind, others call him a folk hero. A few even call him a tragic artist, a man who turned deception into theater. But those who study his life agree on one thing. He captured the spirit of the frontier like no one else. The West wasn't just about guns and gold. It was about risk, the belief that luck could rewrite destiny. And that's the world Soapy ruled. He wasn't the fastest gun or the richest man, but he was the best storyteller. He created illusions people wanted to believe, and in doing so, he turned himself into one, his great-grandson. Jeff Smith III later became the keeper of his history, preserving his letters, photos, and relics on a website and in books. He wanted people to know that Soapy wasn't just a villain. He was human. A man born into hardship, shaped by chaos and driven by dreams too big for the world he lived in. And maybe that's why people still talk about him. Because his story isn't just about crime, it's about survival. Soapy Smith lived fast, died young, and left behind a tale that refuses to die. His name stands beside those of Jesse James, Billy the Kid, and Wyatt Earp, men who became more legend than flesh. But while the others fought with guns, Soapy fought with words, and words, as history has shown, last longer than bullets. In the end, maybe Soapy's greatest victory was this. He became part of the American story. His life, wild and flawed, reminds us of a time when courage, confidence, and cunning could make a man famous, or destroy him. He showed that power doesn't always come from force. Sometimes it comes from a smile, a story, and the ability to make people believe the impossible. And though he fell on his own terms, standing tall, holding his rifle, facing the crowd that once cheered for him. The King Khan was gone. But the legend had only just begun. Today, when people walk through Skagway's quiet streets, they pass the same docks where Soapy met his end. The sea still whispers, the wind still hums through the old buildings, and if you listen closely, you might just hear it. That confident voice calling out once more, "Step right up, folks, and take your chance." Because the game never truly ends. Not for men like Soapy Smith. He came from nothing, tricked the world, and became a legend. Not for what he took, but for what he made us believe.